Thank you very much for that, panelists. Last and certainly not least, the fourth and final panel of the summit explores new opportunities in energy security and investments across emerging sectors in the green economy. Moderating this panel is Mr. Wee Boon Seong, Chief Executive Officer of Sustainability Consultancy RHT Green. He will be joined by Mr. Edward Tay, Chief Executive Officer of Sistema Asia Capital, Mr. Joseph Jacobelli, Founder and Managing Partner, Asia Clean Tech Energy Investments Company Limited, Dr. Michael Lokinva Sim Abundo, Chief Executive Officer of Ocean Pixel Private Limited, Mr. Vineeth Menon, Decarbonization Advocate, PhD Candidate, Nanyang Technological University.
Good afternoon. We are here at the last panel of the day. We have heard discussions on geopolitical situations, settling disputes, and also on digital economy. Now, we are going to talk about new opportunities in energy security and investments in emerging sector in the green economy. As the world develops, we are all very dependent on energy. The energy consumption in the world has doubled in the last 30 years or so. A large part of the energy we consume comes from fossil fuel, which is adding about almost 40 billion metric tons of CO2 to the atmosphere every year. Hence, there is an increasing impetus for us to find new sources of energy to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel. In the last 2 years, there have also been much disruption in the world, from COVID-19 to the Russian-Ukraine war and the tensions between China and the US. This has caused many countries to go back to fossil fuel to satisfy their immediate needs. And there are also questions if they can even meet their energy needs at all. With this, let me go on to the panel. We are very privileged to have an esteemed panel this afternoon to talk about this very important topic. First we have Dr. Michael Abando. Dr. Abando is a green and blue technopreneur. So I will let him introduce himself in a while. Then we also have Mr. Vinev, who is a researcher doing his PhD on hydrogen energy. We have also Mr. Joseph Jacopelli. He is unfortunately unable to join us here in the panel. He has dialed in from Hong Kong, and he is the managing partner for a single family office and also at the Asian Clean Tech Energy Investments. Last but not least, we have Mr. Edward Tay. Edward co-founded the Asian Sustainability Forum. Unfortunately also that he is unable to join us today, but he has kindly done a short video on this, on his take on this topic, which we will take a look now before we go on with the panels on stage.
Thank you very much to the organizer for inviting me to share in this forum. To slow the damages we are doing to the planets and the environments, humans must transition away from the use of fossil fuels. Intergovernment panels on climate change, IPCCs, consider it absolutely essential to restrict global warming in this century to 1.5 degrees. The world now is facing an increasing geopolitical tensions and an extended period of inflationary pressures. The rate of innovations in this sector is accelerating, and the regulators are struggling to keep pace. So where are the new opportunities in energy security, and what are the new investments in this new and green economy? My name is Edward Tay, CEO for Systema Asia Capital, a fund manager that is registered in Singapore with 4 tech unicorns under our belt to date. And I am also an associate professor for UNITA, United Nations Institute for Training and Research. 2022 is set to be the record year in terms of the scale at which the switch over from the fossil fuels to the renewable sources will take place, because of the need for every country to achieve energy resilience. Look at Sri Lanka energy crisis now. Another example, major European energy companies, Shell, RWEs, are investing their first green hydrogen pipelines from offshore wind plants in the North Sea throughout Europe. Our conservative estimates is the value of the renewable energy markets is set to grow from about 880 billion to nearly $2 trillion by 2030. With a growing awareness of the importance of environmental and social governance, ESG issues, it means that there will be tremendous political motivations to spur the necessary changes on the regulatory fronts. Green financing is going to accelerate our transition towards a greener economy. And this is also a year in which we will see a lot of new and exotic sources of energy emerging from the laboratories and pilot projects, and will start to become a part of our daily life. For instance, in France, a startup, BFC, has created paper biofuel cells that convert glucose and oxygen into electricity. This is a new form of non-toxic, recyclable, and eco-friendly batteries that's able to be used in low-power applications such as IoT sensors and transmitters. And another great example is a project that is led by the Baltic Seas of Action Group. Sewage waste that is discharged from the cargo ships will be converted into biogas fuel for use in the transport industry. More of such energy startups will come with innovation to disrupt our industries in unimaginable ways. Let's examine some of the impactful technology in the energy sector. Artificial intelligence in the energy sectors. As with every sector, AI is having transformative effects across energy and utilities. It is used to forecast demands and manage the distribution of resources to ensure that power is available at the time and place that is needed with a minimum of waste. We predict that AI will play an essential role in the world transition to clean energy. And these gains in efficiency will be created by a more accurate forecasting of supply and demand. An example, RHT in Germany has created a service called OptiWise that calculates power consumptions and carbon dioxide emissions to allow consumers to monitor the effects of their power consumptions in real time and to make more educated decisions about their own energy supplies. Green hydrogen energy. Hydrogen is the most abundant materials in the universe and produce close to zero greenhouse gas emissions when burnt. These are two of the most important qualities that make it a very exciting potential source of energy. The Internet of Energy. It is a subset of the Internet of Things, IoT, that concerns about the generation and distribution of power. IoT is closely tied to the idea of energy decentralization, the move towards a more sustainable power infrastructure where energy is used as closely as possible to the time and the place where it is created. This new paradigm in energy infrastructures involves a significant amount of automations in order to manage the new technology platforms, as well as the financial framework required by the global markets to facilitate energy trading and distribution. Bioenergy. Energy derived from biomass and biofuel has the potential to generate far more of the power used by human society than it does today. And in recent years, we have seen a strong trend attempting to unlock this massive potential. 2022, we will see an increase in projects looking at new methods of converting biological matters into energy. Brewers Heineken has unveiled plans to power these production sites in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, on waste rice husks that's produced by local farmers. By International Energy Agency's estimates, bioenergy will account for 30% of the renewable energy production by 2023, which is next year. So what are the global impacts that we can expect in the coming years? My learned panel speakers will be able to share more insights later on, but I've captured a short summary of my earlier points. Thank you very much for having me. It is my privilege and honor, and I do hope that everyone enjoy the rest of the panel in this forum.
Okay, thank you, Edward. Now I shall invite my esteemed panelists to comment on what Edward has to say. He mentioned quite a few things, right? I mean, energy storage and the new sources of energy like hydrogen and biomass, etc. So, would anybody like to comment?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Sure. Amir, hi Boon Siong, and very good afternoon to all the panelists as well. Glad to be here. And thank you, Edward, for sharing very insightful and a very broad and diverse range of alternative energy sources for consideration. And I think he's kind of like opened up the floor for a good discussion for the next 40 minutes. Now, if I could very briefly touch on hydrogen storage. Now, hydrogen storage, as how Edward alluded to earlier, hydrogen being the most abundant element on Earth, comes with certain consequences. And one of which is challenging to manage, is to keep those very small molecules within the containment itself. So storage plays an important role, especially when it comes to the availability of energy and the transportation of it. Now, options include liquefying hydrogen. Now, that's a very promising method that is being contemplated, because you can move larger quantities of it, but it comes with certain drawbacks, such as energy penalty. 1/3 of the energy that hydrogen possesses will actually be used to liquefy it in the first place. So you're left with that 2/3, that's one. And the second is hydrogen generally is low in its energy density, meaning to say, if I have 1,000 cubic meters of diesel, which is the traditional fuel of today, I would need about 4 times that space to hold the same energy. And that kind of space is challenging to find in today's energy market. How about you, Mama?
Yeah. So could I go next? Yeah. Thank you, Edward, and welcome to all our audience for today. I'd just like to react that although there were nuggets of ideas in there, I think we need to open it up a little bit more. I know it was a trajectory into what 2030 may look like, or how this there's a positive, shall we say, direction as to where renewables will go, and there will be complementary technologies around it that will make it happen. So just on the options of renewable energy, and later maybe I'd speak more about it, there is also the possibility for blue, quote-unquote, blue opportunities, not just green economies, but blue economies. And there are renewable energy options in the marine space, marine resources, which, you know, in Southeast Asia, if we look at our countries here, Indonesia, the Philippines, we're archipelagic by nature, lots of islands, and we do have coasts. You know, Singapore is mainly an island, and I think we should consider marine renewable energy, where you could tap energy from traditionally what we have as maybe offshore renewables, whether it's from wind, or now we have marine floating solar systems, solar PV systems, and we do have ocean renewables as well as a subset of that, whether they come from tides, currents, waves, the thermal gradient, salinity gradient. So all of these are opening up, and in fact, a lot of agencies have begun to explore these options as well. That really increases the possibility of having renewable energy into the mix, even for island microgrids, which, you know, people always claim there's not enough space, we'd rather use the space for something else, we need to stay on the land. Obviously, these are all good considerations. Now, it's very rare that people consider marine space as something where they could actually put up some form of energy ecosystem as well. So that's something that I'd like to speak more a little bit later. But all the points that Edward mentioned are, for us, both challenges and opportunities, I would say. But let's look at the glass half full. I think these are all seeds that catalyze more and more opportunities for us to look into. And it's not going to be us who's going to be really moving the needle forward. We can start it now, our generation, but you know, it's going to be the next generation folks that are going to really need to follow through on this. And we should send them, we owe them, we owe them the right signals at this point in time to lead them to that right trajectory, the right direction, and springboard them into what may become a sustainable world. And you know, that's not only by technology, but you need the right progressive development mindset coupled with a lot of let's say, support. It needs resources to mobilize such a change, you know. So I guess we need to think about this holistically. And I think if we are aligned and stakeholders are willing to, you know, go and achieve these big, hairy, audacious goals, then we do have a fighting chance. So I'm going to leave it at that, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. Joseph, your views, please.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to kind of piggyback on something that Mike was talking about. He was talking about the education process, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. What I mean by that is that, you know, renewable energy is really or clean energy in general is a kaleidoscope of a multitude of things. It's not as straightforward and as easily understood as fossil fuel energy, gas, coal, oil, where that comes from, what you do with it. The ecosystem is a lot more complicated, and there's a lot of misunderstanding, misperceptions, et cetera, et cetera. And here is kind of the keys for, from very, very early on to understand that there are other sources and other alternatives of renewable energy. Some of them are at a little bit earlier stage of development, and I don't know what, Mike, hope you can piggyback on that, but I think, marine energy is slightly earlier stage and say something like onshore wind or utility scale solar, but it's definitely gaining ground, and that's really important. But I think what is missing is really more of a better understanding on how these different pieces of the puzzle work together, collaborate together, cooperate together. And the way to achieve that, I think, is starting from schools, but I think everybody needs to be educated. If you talk to some people in financial institutions, you'll find the clean energy girl or guy who's basically been doing clean energy for 5 minutes and doesn't necessarily understand the full full ecosystem of what clean energy is all about. And as Professor Tai mentioned earlier, you got some kind of associated things that you need to understand, e.g. the whole digitalization thing, not just smart grids, not just smart cities or smart houses, but it's a lot more complicated than that. So that would be my preliminary thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. The things that we know that you are doing investment in this space, including the energy space. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about how you assess it, because I suppose this is still a very new domain. Yeah, how would you look at what's coming up, and how would you decide on what to invest in?
Sure. I mean, I have to point out I've got two hats on, sort of two heads, twins. One is running a single-family office, and there we are investing in equities and bonds. And obviously, we have an investment process to ascertain the climate risk impact on those companies, and we obviously try to avoid those. The second hat is as an advisor to investors. So we go out and find projects for them, structure them, etc. On that second, so on the equities and bond side, well, the process is evolutionary. It's still early days. And what I'm talking about is, we small investors are waiting for more transparencies from governments, because, they give us taxonomies on what is green and what is brown, but it's incredibly complicated. There's only 24 hours a day. So, going and if you want the data, get the data, it's very, very expensive. You have to go to some of the credit agencies, like Moody's or MSCI, and it's very, very expensive. So small investors don't have access to that. So hopefully there's going to be a democratization of the data, which is going to allow asset managers like ourselves to access that data. So that's on the kind of public markets side. On the project side, we could do a workshop for 3 or 4 days on how to approach projects and how not to approach projects. But the 10-second answer is we need to do an enormous amount of due diligence. Obviously, at the end of the day, it is all about risk-adjusted returns. And on that point, that conversation sometimes with the direct investors, so our clients, is a little bit complicated, because if they're looking at a global return, say, for example, they're based in, India, and they believe that, their return, a benchmark is 15%. Well, 15% in Japan is astronomical. 15% in Myanmar is low. So, you've got these nuances of returns. But generally speaking, at the end of the day, it's all about the return on investment that we have to assess very, very carefully. And what I mean by risk adjusted is then we take into consideration, does the project have a long-term power purchasing agreement? Is the technology reliable and proven, et cetera, et cetera. I hope that answers your question, but again, it's a 4-day workshop, if not longer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Joseph, for the 10-second or maybe a bit longer answer to a 3-day answer, right? Our panel over here, do you have anything to add to Joseph, or you have questions for Joseph?
No, maybe I can just piggyback on what Joseph just said. I think he touched on the investments, correct? And on that note, well, two things came to my mind. The first is the frameworks that are now being developed and adopted by many companies to position themselves to recognize the threats of climate change, as well as to capture the opportunities. Some of these frameworks include TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So such frameworks kind of give investors or it identifies key opportunities, correct? That's what we're talking about here today, correct? How the key opportunities can be identified, and through these frameworks, which are now not regulated, but they are available, would position the investor to be able to capture such opportunities at a much quicker pace, and with more information now being available on the internet as well. In the marine sector, we have its corresponding financial targets and matrices as well, where we have IMO, which is the International Maritime Organization, have set very ambitious targets, for 2030 and 2050. And then to govern all these, you have the Poseidon Principles. So I think we are all talking about the same thing, and the kind of tools that we have now in our arsenal is great, and we can just capitalize on that and ensure, like how Joseph was saying earlier, do our due diligence to ensure that these are well studied before the investment has been made. Yeah.
I just need to piggyback on something that Vinette said just now, and let's have an argument to make it exciting. I slightly disagree with the fact that the tools are readily available. I think there's more tools today in 2022 than there was, say, 2 or 3 years ago. But my argument is that at this stage, we haven't really seen a, let's call it, democratization of analysis tool available to all. Again, if you can pay for it, that's great. Now, when you're doing smaller projects, and we're talking, if you're doing if you're doing a big project, say multi-billion-dollar offshore wind farm, spending, 100,000 US on data is not a huge deal. But if you're doing smaller projects, say a 5 megawatt utility solar farm, or a 20 megawatt onshore wind project, there the cost of getting that data, plus then you also got to get obviously legal advice. You may have to get some consultancy to do some technical verifications, et cetera, et cetera. You put all of those basic costs together, it makes a lot of the smaller projects almost uninvestable. And it shouldn't be that way. So I totally agree with what Vinette said, with a slight twist that I don't think as of today, all of the tools that are needed to make rational investment decisions for clean energy projects are readily available if the project is too small to pay for it.
Yep. Yeah, unfortunately that's true. I mean, currently, if you talk to different companies, they have different ways of describing themselves. You ask for data, they have they may give you data, but the data will mean different things to different people. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the current situation. I hope that can be improved. Maybe looking at the other side, Michael here is a technopreneur. Right, he does green and blue energy. So perhaps he can tell us a bit about the green and blue energy later. But then I suppose from the discussion just now, he can also tell us about his perspective as somebody who looks for investor, right? I mean, what are the challenges from your perspective?
And thank you for that. Actually, I was gonna hop onto sort of what you guys just mentioned there, and a simple, I would say not acronym, but a mnemonic came to my head, which came about in a few of the sessions or discussions that happened with Asia Clean Energy this year. I don't know if you're aware, there's this 3D, 3Ds, should we say, guidance with decarbonization, right? That's the first D. You need digitalization so that you can achieve also decentralization. So decarbonization, digitalization, decentralization. And there was a fourth D that was mentioned by Joseph just now, democratization. I think that's important too, because if people don't have access to the tools, or it's, there's a barrier that is humongous, then obviously we don't get to accelerate the energy transition. And might I add that the frameworks that you mentioned there, Beneath, I agree with that. I totally agree that we do have some frameworks already in place. And I would say we have skeletons, we have the blueprints, but we need to substantiate them a bit more. We need not just the bones, we need the flesh, we need the blood. We need to know how to operationalize a lot of these frameworks. And that's true from wearing my technopreneurial hat. People don't know how to develop projects in a way that could get it investable or funded by, impact investors and whatnot. And funding versus financing, the difference between that, hybridizing financing, whether you have grants and debts and equity coming in. So people are kind of not used to the new ways or models that these really good sustainable development projects could be formulated, and I think that's good. That 3-day workshop that you're speaking about, Joseph, I think that's good. That we need to roll that out. We need to have capability development programs, honestly. And there is this donor-funded facility, the Southeast Asian Energy Transitions Partnership, that we've been sort of talking to them, and they prioritize 3 countries in Southeast Asia at the moment: the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And they committed, I think, $100 million over a 5-year period just to do technical assistance and just to do coordination. They will not even put that money in actual projects. It's just to prepare the ground so that private sector plus, the government understand that there is, pardon the pun, but there's a seabed, a foundational thing here that needs to be prepared. And before you can plant the seeds, you need to till the land, so to speak, And so I think that's great that there are such resources made available. And I feel like any high-level investor forum that brings together like-minded entities that could move our, let's say, sustainability goals, even if it's one step at a time, those are things that are pretty useful. So what we're doing here, this panel, this is helpful, this is useful, let's make it widely available. I heard that, things are going to be made available in YouTube later, so that's great, that's great. Let's get the word out there. But we need to make sure that there is also the right sort of signaling in terms of authority, because people can Google the internet and sometimes they really come up to weird sites that have weird things inside them that claim to be, oh yeah, you can generate energy out of a Mountain Dew bottle and mix it with this and that, and here you go, it's a battery. Oh my gosh, and people start doing it. They waste a lot of time, and that's just sort of maybe the provincial example. But imagine if government officials started listening to something which was not right and not correct, and that's going to be detrimental to the movement, I mean, we're here, yeah, sure, maybe 80%, 90% of everyone speaking about sustainability and renewables and energy efficiency and the energy transition. All of us probably have some messaging here and there, but we'll probably need to also have a common platform, a common kind of communication stream almost, right? That doesn't confuse people, because some people get confused very, very easily. And so whether it's technology, projects, investments, I think people have sometimes the wrong notion of things. And I get this a lot in terms of pushing for marine renewables, for instance. They say, oh, aren't you gonna, when you put a turbine in the water, the fish are gonna get chopped, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Oh my gosh. So there are these perceived risks, and perceived risks really could bring down a lot of projects, because sometimes the answer is not good enough. They will, and this is a real case in Canada, by the way, they will require some form of monitoring and regulation, and you'll need to do monitoring for the next 5 years before we can allow such technologies to be deployed. And so that kind of taps the brakes a little to the negative side, and I feel like people are being concerned about stuff that probably need a little more, we need a little more boldness to sort of get into. But not saying that it's a bad thing to be careful and be cautious, but there should be an accepted, as you mentioned, risk-adjusted return, right? So there should be an acceptable level of risk to move something forward, and not sort of look at just pulling things back just because it may have something negative that could happen. So in order to push things forward, you know, that capability development, which lays down the groundwork for proper communication and education, is important. It's vital, and I think commonality in messaging, I think that's something worthwhile putting in either investment or grants into. Actually, we don't even have an Energy Transitions Institute, for instance, in this region, right? But that's something that we should have, actually. And I feel like, I mean, having a forum like this and sort of interacting with very good panelists is the ground to catalyze what might become later on a program, you know, and hopefully a program that's worth funding and worth investing in. As the return on investment need not just be monetary. The return on investment can be more than that, you know. It's not just money, right? I mean, there is a return on investment in terms of the environment, being able to cope up, the social side of things, you know. And so, I mean, all these, the common good of society, I mean, those are returns that maybe right now people say, oh, it's intangible. Actually, not so. I think it's tangible now. There are metrics to say that we can get these impacts from certain things that we do, and these are the outcomes that are expected. Yes. So that's my take.
Yes, yeah. I mean, definitely. The thing is that actually a lot of these actually are quite tangible, like you said, right? It's just that we probably have to make them a bit more explicit. Unfortunately, a lot of people are still a bit fuzzy about it. Perhaps you can also tell us a bit about the blue energy that you are doing.
Oh, sure. So let's shift gears here a little bit. We all talk about the green economy, and people seem to associate now green with sustainability. That's really good. That's really good. People also maybe tend to be afraid to go towards what are other opportunities beyond just land, you know. And so this is where we, as a company, Ocean Pixel, we've been looking at marine renewables since we spun off from Nanyang Technological University in 2014. But we've grown sort of the portfolio to support the blue economy, which, if you think of it from an analogy perspective, green, probably people think about green buildings, electric vehicles, you know, solar on land renewables, energy efficiency. That's good. It's green. It's associated with leaves. It's associated with trees, right? And that's why you have the greening of certain things. Now, the blue economy is somewhat the greening, but in the marine, coastal, and offshore ecosystems. So the blue economy, that's not something that we've coined. That's a term that is widely used, even by developmental organizations, to refer to anything in that coastal, marine, and offshore space. And that could be renewables. Yes, you have offshore wind, you have marine renewables. And that could be the use of the energy. It could be, you know, through the electrification of vessels, desalination of water. You can look at also sustainable tourism, protection of marine areas. You could look at sustainable extraction of resources from marine environments. And you look at livelihood. I mean, aquaculture, right? Food, energy, water, and the social aspects of communities in islands, etc. So all of these make up the blue economy. And I think the blue economy will need, by default, to be sustainable. you can't call it a blue economy, I think, if it were not, in the first instance, using green principles.
Yep.
So, and that's something that we're pushing for, especially if you wanted to start small, and I go back to what Joseph mentioned, to make something investable. Do you just look at a 5 megawatt solar project on an island and that's it? Actually, no. You need to look at, sure, I'm going to put in 5 megawatts of solar, and by the way, by doing that, there will be more reliability in energy. There's going to be 24/7 energy because of this hybridization that I'm going to do. But also it opens up jobs, jobs for people to now put livelihood into the mix there, not just on the O&M of this solar facility, but maybe the energy can also be used for other things. Now you spec it up to not just be an energy plan, but you spec it out to be the island development plan, and the energy could then catalyze, hey, I could do cooling, I could freeze the fish, I could make my aquaculture, seaweed production more efficient because I don't use diesel gensets anymore. I could desalinate water, by the way, and these are all technologies that are available, and we need to just integrate the way that we think when we put in renewable energy projects, into, let's say, what are the other services around it that could be enabled? And these are things that we can start from a small scale, quote unquote, yes, that 1 to 5 megawatt island ecosystem. But we need to think about how that can enable and grow other businesses, which, by the way, we don't need to fund as, let's say, the project developer. It could be that we work with the local government and they can co-fund stuff. And leveraging is something that's really, really useful now because people are willing to put in money for certain outcomes. They want to catalyze certain things, and they might have different goals. But at the end of the day, someone needs to orchestrate them, put them in the right buckets, and make sure that they do become a synergistic, cohesive program. And I think that's what's missing at the moment in developing the blue economy, because let's face it, first of all, no one talks about it, and second of all, no one knows what these elements all are, and if they do know that, they work in silos, so we need to sort of collaborate and make sure that we can bring everything together. And I haven't mentioned even blue carbon credits, so those are things that can come into play as well, and I think if we're able to mix that all together, as a recipe, I think that becomes a really, really investable proposition.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think, Mike, we've got, I don't know if you agree, but I think we do have some success stories in terms, so you're talking about you need an entity to come through and coordinate, like you say, orchestrate this, because it's not a standalone solar plant, it's not a standalone marine energy or aquaculture facility, it's all kind of combined, and then you've got this underlying digital solution which can be your coordinating kind of tool. I think there's some success stories around the region. I would argue personally that China, South Korea, and probably Singapore have shown quite a bit of leadership. Not necessarily just I'm not talking about just the blue economy. I'm talking about this kind of coordination, collaboration of getting these hybrid projects together. So there is a little bit of a track record of some countries that do it. Then you go to some other countries, which I won't necessarily mention, where you've got if you need an approval for something, you may need to go to 30 different government departments and bureaus. That by the time you finish, you probably you're probably dead. So I think the takeaway here is that, as I was saying before, clean energy is a little bit of a kaleidoscope of a landscape. It needs a lot of different pieces to be put together, and you need an entity to do that. And the leading entity that can do that is obviously governments. And when you do have some examples of, Korea doing it, China, of course, has been a success story when it comes to that. But even in China, because people forget that, China is a big country with lots of people. So sometimes, what goes right in Guangdong is not necessarily studied in Shandong, for example. And then you've got Singapore, which has, truly become one of the, at least, leading thinkers when it comes to clean energy around the region. I'm not saying that because you guys are in Singapore, because actually I'm in Hong Kong, but that's just my personal view and my personal assessment.
I agree with you, Joseph. So just very quickly on that. Yeah. So there are good examples, and I think we need more. I think we need more success stories from that sort of island level setting, and with the mentality of already integrated systems, And I forgot to mention that blue economy obviously covers a portion also of the hydrogen economy, because that's something that enables it, So, but anyway, I agree with what you said. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Shall we move on to Vinith? I mean, Vinith has done quite a bit of research in the energy space, especially in hydrogen. Perhaps he can tell us a bit about what he has done. And what are his views? And of course, we were talking about all the different colors. You can tell us more about the colorful hydrogen. Yes.
Definitely. Well, I think there was a very good conversation that was ongoing just now. And I think if I can sum it all up, it underpins what our panel is discussing, correct? Which is energy security. How are we able to provide affordable energy that is robust enough to withstand short-term shocks to the system, to balance supply-demand issues that happen in this short-term space. Now, the blue economy, like how Mike was sharing earlier, together with the green economy, provides this diversification, where now you have more than one source to get your energy from, and then you have a multitude of weapons in your arsenal, so to speak, to be able to supply the required energy to the country as required. Now, hydrogen in this space provides a unique opportunity simply because it is completely carbonless, without any carbon at all. So you eliminate the emissions. Now, as how Edward was sharing earlier, no doubt it is the most abundant element. One of the issues with that is that it is quite unstable. So a lot of energy is needed to extract it from methane, for example. One of the more common examples is methane, where you extract it from a carbon molecule, which then brings back the topic of emissions once again. But more importantly, energy security is something that needs to be addressed, and the tools that we have here that were discussed are, generally speaking, walking towards the right trajectory, towards enabling this security to be obtained.
Yep. Okay, thanks. Shall we move on to the longer-term trend of energy? Right. I suppose there are a lot of new and emerging technology out there. Some relatively mature, some not as mature. What are some of your views, and how do you see this technology will evolve over time? Who wants to start first?
You should take that first, yeah.
So, well, longer-term trends point us towards electrification as one of the options that you can use to provide the required energy. Now, when it comes to electrification, the short-term challenge, or the long-term goal, is to increase the energy efficiency. Now, your combustion engine, which is what we're all very familiar with, is restricted in how much energy you can completely extract from it. So electrification provides that opportunity. Hybridization, where you combine a generator and a battery, for example, are some long-term solutions that can sufficiently power the world's economy. And in Singapore, we have some restrictions with regards to our land space. Nonetheless, there are many options and very helpful neighbors that can help us achieve this. A very good example would be Australia, where Australia is a country that is generating renewable energy at a lower cost. Now, what that can do for us, it can be served as a medium for the transportation of energy that is being harnessed using renewable energy, so green energy, and then these fuels or this energy supply can be shipped into Singapore. Japan, for another example, has a massive undertaking for their hydrogen plant, where they intend to build their electrolyzers. Now, electrolyzers are pieces of equipment which help produce hydrogen from water. Now, these equipment are able to then provide, if the economies of scale are met, you are looking at being able to generate hydrogen at a much lower cost and comparable to fossil fuel parity in the next 5 to 10 years. Now, what that implies is that you now have an option to switch, without having any negative impact in terms of cost. So the landed cost, which is the cost that you calculate based on the transportation, production, distribution, is essentially the cost that will go into your return of investment. And once these show positive signs within next 5 to 10 years, I think that's what the long-term horizon will look like in making easier decisions, easier final investment decisions in such projects and in such developments.
Could I
Sure.
go next? Yeah, for that. So just looking at the
you have to keep it
long
short.
term. Yeah, sure. Keep it short. Yeah. Thank you. I see a lot of growth in the marine renewable energy space. That's untapped. Ocean sustainability and these spaces are yet to be explored and maybe harnessed properly. There is an Asian Development Bank project to look at marine aquaculture, renewables, and reef and ecosystem services, MARES for short, for countries that probably have a lot of sea space but don't have a lot of land, and they're exclusive economic zones like Palau and the Marshall Islands. What can they do? Their demand is probably barely 100 megawatts, but aggregated if the islands were there. But they have a lot of space that probably could host something like an ocean thermal energy facility or an offshore wind plant. But what are you going to do to use the energy for? So what you mentioned there about hydrogen, if we have green hydrogen production through the renewables that are in the marine space, you could use that to essentially boost economic activity.
Exactly.
and be part of the solution globally, right?
Yeah.
Even with a small footprint. And I think that's doable for all these types of island ecosystems, the small island developing states, Maldives, and Singapore included, but we're limited in terms of marine space as well. So in marine renewable energy, tidal energy is there, wave energy is coming up. Also, ocean thermal energy is sort of moving with Japan sort of spearheading the developments there. So I think the ocean, looking at the ocean as an answer to the energy security and long-term goal is probably going to be worthwhile pursuing now. And putting, there's investment also coming into it, so that we can look at 10 years down the road, sustainable development and activity on these marine and offshore locations. And that will, in return, I think, spur on a sustainable blue economy.
Definitely.
Yeah. Joseph, your views?
Sure. My point is pretty simple. I think that, 20, 30 years from now, we'll have a very diversified platform of technologies, some of them that we'd never heard of before, some of them that are being kind of commercialized now. I think the elephant in the room, and this is my own personal opinion, not representing anybody, my clients, previous employers, is that, is a big elephant in the room, and that's China. China is the country in the world that has, the leading country in the world that has commercialized technologies the best. They've managed to reduce the cost of solar panels in the past, 10 years or so for everybody by a rate of 15 to 20% per annum. They've managed to reduce the cost of onshore wind turbines. They're doing the same right now with offshore wind turbine. They're spending a lot of money, a lot of effort in energy storage. And the secret is it's not some kind of magical trick. The secret is size. Because whatever, when you're putting up 300 gigawatts of wind farms in 5 years, which is an astronomical numbers for those of you who don't really follow megawatts and gigawatts. You get economies of scale, you reduce costs, you get better, you raise the quality, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's going to be really led by China, and also in the next, as I said, 20, 30 years, we'll see a whole myriad. We'll see a lot more marine energy solutions, because I know that right now there isn't one, there are several. Green hydrogen will become a reality because, again, it's going to be at scale and at size. And I think shorter term, probably next, hopefully 5 years, maybe 10 years, also energy storage. We'll find, newer solutions of energy storage that don't require as many rare earths, that can, help all types of renewables, because obviously we all know that we don't have solar power at night, and we don't have wind power when there's no wind. So, so that I think is a general trend that I. But if you'd like to know more, Boon Seong, you can go and get my book that I published last year. That's my pitch now, the Asia's Energy Revolution,
yes.
Which is exactly what I'm talking about, which is Asia is the center of the world when it comes to opportunities in investing in clean energy in general. Why? One, it's 50% of total energy consumption in the world, and the next guy is probably half that. Number two, 89% of energy consumption in Asia is in jurisdictions which are still developing.
Yeah.
So your growth rate is going to be higher than mature markets like North America and Europe. So that's really the 2 points. And the other things, the other two things that are going to happen at the same time is the digitalization drive, which we're already seeing in a lot of different countries, as well as of course, going from brown to green. Sorry, I get excited. It's the long term is something I get very excited about.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any questions from the audience? I think we have covered quite a bit of stuff over here. Perhaps we can end on something, opportunities for our audience. What do you think are opportunities for everyone in the energy space?
I could take that on first. I think this ecosystem is really up for grabs, guys. Honestly, in the energy space, you could be in your own field, be contributing your own professional skill set. From being a renewable energy project developer, an energy service company, to being an EPC, engineering, procurement, and construction company, to financing, to being investing, to being consultants, being a technology provider, being someone in the startup space, being someone in the digital space, being someone who doesn't know anything about technology but still wants to push sustainability forward, an educator, right, a lawmaker, an official, let's say, in the community. I think everyone can sing the same song of sustainability, and whatever form or fashion that they have or they have expertise or are into. I have heard a poet put sustainability and marine energy into her collection of books. So songwriters can do that, artists can do this, and we need to get that message out there. So I think if you are passionate about sustainable development, not just energy security and sort of the regional aspects of it, there is a role for you in your own network, in your own universe, let's say, in your ecosystem to contribute. And if you want to know more, I think you can reach out to folks who are probably just a LinkedIn away, so to speak. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just add on to what Mike just mentioned. Well, he painted a good picture of how everyone can get involved. Now, maybe if I can just dive deeper into that, now that you are interested, correct, and you are passionate about it, how can you actually make it a realization? Now, I think one thing that I would like to highlight in that area is the involvement of governments in terms of their policies. Now, Singapore has a very low carbon tax when you are in comparison to several other first world economies. Now, the carbon tax is a tool that can be used as a double-edged sword. However, what the sharp end of it is actually to encourage, so to motivate transitioners, people who are on the fence, who are unsure what their next project is going to be, diesel or clean or renewable. Now, for folks who are on this fence, this outlook in the next 5 to 10 years will then push or nudge them towards considering the clean energy alternative. So that is how I would like to add as an enabler for this transition and to this green economy and in the overall sphere of energy security.
For me, I my background is finance, so I'll just stick to finance because I'm not a technology guy. Plus, I don't have a PhD like the other two gentlemen, or one soon to have a PhD. And I was going to say finance is really where the opportunity is, because basically finance has to turn green, whether you like it or not, whether you believe in climate change or not. The locomotive has already left the station. The train has already left the station. You don't have a choice. Now, whether it goes fast like a TGV in France, a high-speed train, or it goes a little bit slower like some train in some other countries, we don't. It depends. But at the end of the day, the train has left the station, and green finance and the finance is becoming green. So trying to understand the overall ecosystem, try to understand, carbon products, voluntary carbon credits versus mandatory carbon credits, for example. Try to understand the whole ecosystem of a blue economy. All of those things you do need to get some knowledge, but the opportunity to me in finance is massive, because all of these things that we've talked about for the last hour or so. Guess what? You need money.
Yep.
You need to pay for it.
That's right.
And
look for Joseph, yes.
Let me just check my wallet. Let me just check if I've got. No, sorry, I don't have $20 trillion in my wallet right now. But next time. But the money is there. The capital that wants to go in is there. You just need to build bridges. You just need the education, like Mike mentioned a couple of times. And we're not, when we're talking about education, by the way, we're not talking about people are stupid, they don't get it. We're not talking about that. I myself had to do a lot of work to try to understand the different mechanics. Now, I don't need to understand how a wind turbine actually functions from the technological point of view. I just need to get a broad-based, what makes it tick. So that kind of education that we're talking about. And I think we're getting there. And I think with governments like the Singaporean government or Chinese government or South Korean government, a couple other governments out there, we can probably get there, but it's got to be driven from upstairs. And we, industry participants, need to go there and shout and scream and say, look, we know that you guys are busy, but you really got to understand this and you got to make the right policies. And they got to be long-term policies, not the 5-minute policy, because energy is a long duration asset. All energy, whether it's fossil fuel or clean energy, you invest in a solar plant for 20 years, right? That's why you get your return over 20 years. You don't get it over 5 minutes. It's not a trading option. So it is a long duration asset. So you need long duration, long-term, transparent and consistent policies like you're getting out of, for example, again, Korea, or you're getting out of Singapore. That signals to investors some form of, it basically lowers the risk, period. It's as simple as that. And when your risk is lower, then your required return on capital is also lower.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, panelists. So if I may do a quick sum up, we don't have much time. This is a very complex subject, right? For those people who want to know more, there is the 3-day workshop from Joseph.
Well, actually, no, if I can just mention that we've got, I didn't mention earlier, but I've got this podcast going, which it's a personal project. It's not for profit. And it's exactly that. It's to give people food for thought. It's called the Asia Climate Finance Podcast.
Yeah. Then, of course, those people who want to dive a bit deeper, you can do the 4D. Not the weekend 4D, but the long-term 4D of decarbonization, digitalization, decentralization, and democratization, right? So these are important areas that we have to consider when we look at the solutions. And of course, the solutions also have to be, we also have to look at the transition from a high carbon economy, high carbon energy source to a low carbon or zero carbon energy source, right? The transition is important and it has to be deliberate and planned, and the solution has to be secure, integrated, and robust, right? And as you heard from the panel, there are a lot of opportunities in this space, be it the broader sustainable space, the energy space, or the investment space, right? So if any of you have further questions, feel free to still submit your questions, or we can follow it up after this panel as well. Right. Thanks very much, panel.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Monsieur. Great job with moderating. Thank you.
Thanks.